Welcome to the Sci-Fi Evolution channel. The sun was setting behind the hills when Calix, a lonely farmer on the outskirts of Vestalia, returned to his humble home. The air was filled with the smell of dry earth and wheat. His fields were half-harvested, and his hands ached from a long day of work. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and was about to close the main gate when he heard a light knock. Knock, knock, knock. He was quiet, as if the guest was afraid to make too much noise. Calix froze. It was rare for anyone to venture so far to his farm, which was located far from the settlement. He slowly opened the wooden gate and went outside. There, standing in the dust, was a strange figure, a young Zilian. Her skin was pale gray, and there were glowing blue markings on her neck. Her eyes were wide open and glowed faintly golden in the fading light. She was wearing a torn, dirty cloth over her shoulders, but what really caught Calix's attention were the two small children clinging to her legs. They looked as thin as scarecrows, their cheeks were sunken, and their eyes were tired. The Zilian's voice trembled as she spoke. "Please don't be afraid," she said. "I'm not here to steal." Calix was silent. She took a deep breath and continued. "I'll do any job, whether it's farming, cleaning, digging, or anything else. Just please take care of my children." Her hands were shaking, and her knees seemed about to buckle. Calix looked at her, then at the children. One of them seemed to be barely able to stand. He stepped aside and opened the gate wider, gesturing for them to enter. Inside the house, he lit a fire and put an old kettle on the stove. The children from the Zell system sat huddled together, trembling. The girl was sitting near the door, ready to run away if necessary. He served them a simple meal. A plate of warm soup, nothing special, just broth and soft vegetables. The children grabbed the plates with both hands, as if they had never seen food before. They ate quickly, and tears streamed down their faces. Calix placed a second plate in front of the Zilian. She didn't touch it. He raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you hungry?" She lowered her eyes. "I'll eat after I finish my work," Calix said. "Come on, you haven't touched your food yet." Calix sighed and stood up, handing her a spoon. "While it's still hot," he said. She hesitated, but finally took the spoon. "Thank you," she whispered. Later, Calix gave them some old blankets and took them to the fireplace. He pointed to the corner of the room. "You can rest there. You will be safe here," he said. The children were already asleep, but the Zilian did not go to bed. She sat cross-legged, wide-eyed, watching. Calix noticed this. "Aren't you going to sleep?" She shook her head. "I can't. Do you think I'm going to hurt them?" She didn't answer. He didn't push her. Instead, he walked to the other side of the room, hung his hat on a hook, and sat down in a wooden chair. "I'm not like the ones who made you afraid," he said softly. She looked at him, her lips trembling. "That's what everyone says," he nodded. "I won't say it again. I'll just show you. The Oros have passed." Calix dozed off in his chair. The Zilian remained seated, watching. The woman remained motionless, but when she saw the children sleeping peacefully, she felt the warmth of the fire. When she noticed that the man on the other side of the room hadn't moved from his chair, she finally closed her eyes and fell asleep for the first time in a long time. The morning light came through the small window of the farmhouse. Calix was outside, feeding the chickens. His movements were slow and deliberate, but his thoughts were still about the girl and her children inside. She appeared out of nowhere, quiet and proud despite her desperate situation. He had seen this look before from people who had nothing left, but they were still trying to maintain their dignity. When he returned to the house, he saw that she was standing by the stove. She mopped the floor, folded the blankets, washed the dishes they used, and now stood silently waiting. "I told you to rest," he said. She shook her head. "I said I would work." "You didn't lie," Calix muttered. She stepped aside. The woman pointed to the corner where the children were still sleeping, curled up under a blanket. I didn't want to wake them up, but they were cold and tired, she explained. Calix nodded understandingly. He took out some flour, butter, and dried herbs from a small cupboard. Have you ever made tortillas? He asked. The Zilian hesitated. No, but I can learn, she replied. Great, Calix said. Let's make breakfast. She watched his every move, how he kneaded the dough, how he shaped it, how he cooked it in a warm pan until it turned golden brown. Now it's your turn, he said, offering her some dough. At first, her fingers were hesitant, but after several attempts, she managed to create something that was similar enough. He didn't laugh or make fun of her. He just nodded and said, "Not bad." As the aroma of food filled the hut, the two Zilian children gradually woke up. Their nostrils flared and their eyes widened. The girl handed them warm slices of bread wrapped in a cloth. They grabbed the food as if it might disappear. Then they looked at her as if asking for permission. She smiled softly and nodded. They ate quickly, but not as fast as before. This time they chewed slowly and carefully. It was their first real meal in several oros. Calix put his hand on the table. "Do you have a name?" he asked. She looked down and after a moment replied, "My people call me Zira, but it's hard for people to pronounce it." Calix shrugged his shoulders. "Then I'll give it a try." She looked up, surprised. "I'm not afraid of your name," he added, "and I won't change it just to make it more convenient for me." Zira now looked at him in a different way, not as a potential threat, but perhaps just as a real person. After lunch, she got up and asked, "What can I do today?" Calix gestured to the street. "You can help me with cleaning the tool shed." Without another word, she followed him outside. She worked hard with her sleeves rolled up, her movements quiet and focused. Her hands were nimble, and her back was firm. She didn't complain, even when splinters pricked her fingers or dust filled her lungs. Calix watched her closely, not because he didn't trust her, but because he saw something special about her. Something familiar, a spark that refused to go out even at noon. He offered her water, which she drank with both hands and then returned with a nod. "You don't have to bow," he said. "It's just a sign of respect," she replied. "Where I come from, we bow to those who do not harm us." Calix's face darkened. "It sounds like a place where there is little compassion." She said nothing. By the time the sun went down, the barn had been cleaned. The children played outside with sticks and stones, and Zira watched them closely, never losing sight of them. That evening, Calix made a stew of old vegetables and dried meat. It was a modest meal, but for Zira and her children it was a real feast. After the children fell asleep, Zira stood at the door, looking up at the stars. Calix was sitting next to her on the porch. "You don't talk much," he said. "I talk too much," she replied, "and it hurt me." He didn't press her, just nodded understandingly. After a moment she asked, "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired of seeing good people suffer." She looked at him. "I have nothing to offer, but I keep my word," she said. He turned to her. "You offered your help and kept your word. That's more than most." She looked at the cabin behind her, then at the stars, and then at him. For the first time since arriving, she smiled, a small but sincere smile. Night fell early that day. Clouds rolled in, blotting out the stars. The wind whispered in the fields, rustling the long grass. The finger-like grass explored the farmhouse in search of hidden treasures. The fire crackled softly, and two Zilian children were curled up under a thick blanket, asleep. Calix was sitting at the table, sipping hot tea, while Zira was standing by the window. She was quiet all day, worked harder than usual, cleaned, cooked, and even fixed one of the broken fence boards. She moved like a machine, but Calix could see the tension in her shoulders. Something was building inside her, and tonight it was going to come out. You don't need to rest, Calix said softly. Even when I tell you. Zira did not turn around. I can't afford to rest, she replied. Why not? You and the kids are safe here. They are no longer starving, and no one is following us here. You can slow down. Her hand tightened on the window frame. I thought so once, she whispered. And I was wrong. Calix said nothing. He waited, and eventually she turned to him. Her eyes were no longer shining with the same intensity. They seemed tired and burdened. Do you want to know what I'm afraid of? She asked. Is that true? She asked. Calix replied with a slow nod. Only if you want to share it with me. Zira sat across from him at the table, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them. I was born on the trading moon Isola 7, she began. There was little light, no grass, just cars and shoppers. My parents sold the pieces. When I was 15, they sold me out. Calix frowned, but didn't interrupt. I worked in kitchens and factories, and later in places where no one asked your name, just your body. Her voice didn't shake. She had told this story to herself so many times that it had become a cold, rehearsed fairy tale. I escaped twice, and I was caught both times. The third time, I ran far enough away that they stopped looking. I found the children in a cage, hungry, abandoned. I took them away. You don't even know them, Calix asked softly. Zira shook her head. No, but they looked the way I once looked. So I didn't ask any questions. I just took them. Calix was looking at her. You're not their mother, but you've become one. Zira's throat twitched. I didn't want them to feel lonely. When I was alone, I experienced a strange silence. A silence that made me feel like I would disappear if no one called my name. The fire crackled softly next to me for a while, and we were silent. Calix then leaned forward and asked, Do they ever express their gratitude? Zira replied with a faint smile. Children don't need to do this. I see it in their dreams, when they sleep peacefully without waking up in fear. Calix nodded, and that's how I knew they trusted him. They slept peacefully. She looked at him with a gentle gaze. Do you think someone like me deserves to be accepted? Calix didn't blink. I think you deserve it. She held her breath. She didn't expect kindness. She didn't expect acceptance. The log shifted in the fire, and Zira got up and walked over to it, gently stirring the flames with a stick. People often assume that Zelians don't experience emotions the way humans do, she said. They're wrong. I'm not, Calix said. She looked back. I don't think you're less than human. I think you're bigger than most. Tears welled up in her eyes, but did not fall. Zira taught herself not to let them fall, but one tear nevertheless escaped. She quickly wiped it off, embarrassed. I've been living in the shadows for so long, she whispered. Sometimes I forget that I'm still alive. Calix stood up and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. You're not a shadow here, Zira. They see you. That night, Zira lay down next to the children, hugging them tightly. It wasn't because they were in danger, but because she remembered what it was like to be alone in the dark. She wasn't going to let it happen again this time. 3 Oros have passed, and their routine has become peaceful, almost like a real family. They cooked, cleaned, helped in the fields. The children played with sticks and helped to collect eggs. Calix was smiling more than he had in years. But peace doesn't last long in small towns. Not when people start talking. It all started when Calix went to a nearby settlement to get supplies. He entered the shop as usual, but everything was different. The room became quiet when he entered. 2 men stood at the counter, whispering to each other. One of them turned and stared at him. There's someone in your territory, he said. Calix did not answer. The woman joined the other man, adding, She's not human, Calix. Calix placed the sack of grain on the table. Is there a problem? The shopkeeper asked. People were worried. She doesn't belong here, and she doesn't harm anyone. Calix said calmly. The first man snapped. How long before she steals something? Will he bring others? Calix's jaw tightened. He didn't shout or explain, but just packed up his supplies and left. That night, Zira saw his face when he returned. What happened? She asked. Nothing I expected, he muttered. She said nothing, then said, They know about me. He nodded. Why is that? Because I don't want to complicate your life, she said. You didn't complicate it, he replied. You've made her a better person. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. People talk anyway. They always talk. And then they took action. Calix came over. Let them have another day. A stranger appeared at the gate. A big man with a red scarf, accompanied by two others. The three of them stared at the farmhouse as if it was an intruder. Calix met them at the gate. We heard that you're harboring some outsiders, said the leader. My land, my business. Your land is part of this settlement, and we do not welcome outsiders. Calix's tone turned cold. She's not hiding. I invited her. You're protecting one of them. The man spat on the ground. After all they did, they almost destroyed our settlement 10 years ago. She had nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter. She's one of them. She's raising the kids, Calix said. She's working harder than anyone here. She saved 2 lives. It means something. The man shook his head. You're making a mistake. No, Calix said. If you come back here to threaten her again, I'll make sure you never come back. The men glared, but left. Zira watched the scene. Inside, Calix found her sitting on the porch, holding her youngest child in her arms. She held her breath. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? He asked. For causing you problems? Calix sat down next to her. I was living alone before you came, he said. Not peaceful, just empty. You didn't bring problems, you brought life. Later that evening, when the children were asleep, Zira was standing outside. The air was cool and the sky was clear. Calix walked over to her. Aren't you afraid? She asked. I've faced storms before, he replied. They don't run away from them. You have to stand your ground. She looked at him. Even if it's for someone like me. He nodded. Suddenly, the sky darkened. Before noon, thick clouds hung over the hills, swallowing up the sun. The wind came first, strong and sharp, bending trees and kicking dust into the air. Calix stood on the porch, squinting at the horizon. It's not just rain. Zira came up to him, holding one child on her hip, the other clinging to her leg. The storm, he nodded. Strong. The kind that floods fields and tears off roofs. He looked at his crops, dozens of rows ready for harvesting. All the work of his season. If this storm hits hard, everything will be lost. Zira saw the fear in his eyes and turned to the children. They obeyed without a word, running into the house. Calix came down from the porch and headed for the field. I have to dig drainage ditches to divert the water before it floods everything. You won't make it, she said. I have to try. He grabbed a shovel and ran to the wheat. The wind grew louder, and the first drops fell, cold, fast, and heavy. Calix dug quickly, but the ground was already turning to mud. His hands slipped. The wind tore off his hat, and the rain hit him like rocks. Zira appeared next to him, grabbing another shovel. What are you doing? He shouted through the storm. I said I'm going to work, she shouted back. He wanted to object, but her eyes were full of determination. She didn't wait for permission. She dug, and together they dug deep trenches around the edges of the field. The water began to drain from the roots instead of drowning them. She moved like a flame, swiftly, confidently, without stopping. The rain soaked her hair, and mud stuck to her feet. Her hands were bleeding from stone cuts. The storm has passed, and the sun has almost set behind the hills. They stood there, covered in mud, shivering and out of breath. But the field survived. The wheat bent, but did not die, and the ground was wet, but not washed out. Zira fell to her knees and laughed a tired, ragged laugh. Calix sat down next to her, too exhausted to speak. The next morning, the settlement came, but not with stones and anger, but with curiosity. People saw how they worked during the storm. Several people watched from afar as the Zillion plunged headlong into the mud to save a field that did not belong to her. Old Merrick, the miller, came forward. He suffered less than the others. She's been working through the storm, Calix nodded. He didn't say her name, because he didn't have to. Everyone already knew who she was. A woman with piercing eyes whispered, "She saved this farm." Calix nodded again. While the others were watching, Zira stayed inside, peeking out from behind the curtain. She didn't trust change. While later, there was a soft knock on the door. Zira opened it. A young boy stood on the threshold, holding a bundle in his hands. His mother was standing behind him. "These are dry clothes," she said. "We saw what you did." "Thank you." Zira didn't say anything, just accepted the clothes with trembling hands. Another woman brought soup. An elderly man left his tools on the porch. The same people who used to whisper were now trying to understand. That night, Zira was sitting by the fire. Her legs were bandaged. Calix approached her with a cup of tea. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes gentle. "I did this because this land gave me food, gave my children peace. She gave you to me." He looked into his cup without saying a word. She smiled. It was the first time he hadn't asked her to be smaller, so she gave him everything she had. Outside, the field stood tall in the moonlight, and for the first time, the settlement saw her not as a burden, but as one of them. The rain had passed, the sky was blue again, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and growing crops. The field of Calix, which he feared would be lost, stood proudly, green and alive. It was the only field in the area that survived the storm, not because of luck, but because of it. Zira was sitting on the porch, her hands wrapped in cloth where the shovel had torn the skin. Her legs still hurt, but she didn't complain. She watched her children chasing each other across the grass, laughing with real laughter now. The soft, frightened sounds they made for the first time were the result of not just survival, but also life. She looked up when she heard footsteps approaching, and Calix appeared next to her, carrying a wooden box. Inside were nails, a hammer, and sandpaper. "Why is that?" she asked. He pointed at the dilapidated fence. "I thought we could create something new together," he replied. She smiled. "Something that will hold up?" he asked. She nodded. "Like you," she said. Part 5. While they were getting to work, a figure appeared at the gate. It was Merrick, the old miller, carrying a sack of flour on his back. Calix approached cautiously, but Merrick raised his hand. "It's a gift for her and her children," he said. Zira looked up from the fence. "Why is that?" Merrick slowly lowered the bag. "Because I was wrong. I said terrible things. I thought terrible things, but I saw what you did. No one else would go to that field for the sake of a man who owes you nothing." He looked at the ground. "I wanted to say thank you and apologize." Zira slowly stood up. She stepped forward and bowed. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me." Later that day, others came. The woman brought new shoes for the children. Another one is seeds and fabric for curtains. One of the men who once threw a stone at their window came and stood silently, holding a wooden toy in his hands. He didn't say anything, just left her on the porch and left. Zira's eyes filled with tears, but not from pain, but from gratitude. In the evening, she sat on the porch, watching the sky turn fiery orange. Calix was sitting next to her, sipping warm tea. "You were right," she said, referring to the actions of others. He nodded, acknowledging that it might have taken a while, but they remembered the kindness. Calix nodded and said, "You both showed them strength." She looked down at her hands. "I used to think that I had to prove my usefulness in order to earn every breath. But you deserve so much more," he said. "You've earned your place." The children ran up the steps, both carrying small bouquets of wildflowers. "For you, Mom," said the younger one. Zira's heart sank, and she took the flowers in her hands, smiling so widely that it almost hurt. "Thank you," she whispered. They ran away again, laughing and chasing each other through the tall grass. Calix looked at her. "They're recovering too," he said. She nodded. "Because of this place, because of you." He looked at the ground. "This farm, this life, is no longer just mine." She turned to him. "It feels like the first time,"